the desire for those kinds of explanations, at least in the case of childhood sex abuse, is a blank slatist philosophy, which is the kind of flat eartherism of the left, as I always describe it, but really hard for people to get away from. The question of, if you're doing something evil, you began as basically a good person, so something must have happened to you to cause you to do this evil thing. Of course, this is slightly different from the situation we're talking about here, because there isn't a lot of propaganda, brainwashing. There isn't a whole ideology that goes along with being a childhood sex abuser. There isn't. You're not brainwashed from childhood into believing this would be a good thing. You don't do little plays at primary school where you act it out. On the contrary, it's one of the most feared and hated and excoriated acts. But yeah, there's some kind of weird blank slatist ideology also at work there. And I think that's part of what has made some leftists so keen to jump on this bandwagon, to believe that if Hamas and Hamas supporters are doing terrible things, it must be as a result of having been wronged in their turn. So they must have begun somehow with this core of deep goodness, that some terrible trauma must have happened to shift it over.
Right. I want to add something else, going back to that idea that Jews had been victims and then they became victimizers. Very often, I think what I find, and I think a lot of Jews find so offensive about it, I'll just speak for myself. What I find so offensive about it is that, first of all, it's often delivered with fake compassion. Today people don't bother to add it, but, outside of like sharp moments of periods of sharp conflict, or when this conflict is in full global view, people talk about it like, well, yes, we understand why Jews would do this. They were victimized. And so there is like this fake compassion, but then there is a corollary to that. And sometimes people will go into it and they will say, I would have thought the Jews, as the most oppressed people who have suffered so much, would have learned from their suffering to be much more compassionate and to really, to never do to never kill another person or never do anything painful to another human being. And what's so dysfunctional about it, and what's so bizarre and offensive about it actually, is that, so you're saying that it's like the implication is that the Holocaust was sort of a finishing school for Jews, right? It was supposed to be this moral cleanser. It's like Jews had been bad before. They went through the Holocaust. It's supposed to have cleansed them to the point where they are now expected to actually be better than others, so that when they are being killed, they should not respond. When their babies are being kidnapped and strangled and mutilated, they should be above it because they've gone through the Holocaust. They've gone through this finishing school. So they're morally above everybody else. And the truth is, the only thing, I think Israelis like to say it, is that the only thing that Jews should have learned and needed to learn from the Holocaust, the only lesson they learned, and Israelis in fact did learn this lesson, is that they should never be vulnerable again. And they need to have an army and defend themselves so that others can never do these things to them again. That is the only reasonable lesson one should expect from any nation that has undergone a genocide. So there are kind of subtexts and layers to this that are really, I don't know how to characterize it, just twisted, really twisted.